Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
We outnumber, the participants outnumber the panelists by 1, so that's really good. Really good.
Success.
Huge success.
It'll be a cozy roundtable.
We are now what I believe they call artisanal.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Farm to table
Yeah.
teaching.
Farm to table teaching, our artisanal pedagogy.
Yeah.
It's some free trade fair.
It's super
Fair
free.
trade, free
Yeah.
range.
Free range.
Very free range.
Very free range.
Shares away and let us run around.
Yeah.
You can find out who those people are.
So on the Blackboard site, it had a list of participants and it was like
35 people.
35. Yeah, is that everybody who's here? Or?
Well,
or is it
last
for this
week I
particular
did a
one?
session and we had 18 registered and 3 showed up.
Okay.
So
I think everybody just wants to be on the Blackboard page, and then I'll look at the slides later.
some of those will be available for you as soon as I get back to the office after today.
That means they can't ask questions.
Yeah, well, hopefully, are we gonna leave the Blackboard discussion open,
We could.
the forum?
Mhm.
So maybe one thing to do is email afterward and say, hey, here, the slides are up.
Yes.
Oh,
We can check on the
You
forum.
appear to have missed the actual presentation. but-
Yeah, we'll do a little shaming as well.
Yes, yes.
I was raised Catholic. I did.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I was raised a lawyer.
Oh, we're on it. We're on the shame aspect of this.
Recall Alan Dershowitz like raging in the newspaper about Harvard's first snow closure ever and how like this meant the world was coming to the end.
I was there at the time.
Do you remember? This was
Wow.
like the snowstorm of like 98 or 97. Oh no, it was yeah.
So I was having final exams, as a graduate student.
Wow.
No, maybe it was 80 something, but it was,
That was the blizzard.
yeah.
And I was on Cape Cod.
People were cross-country skiing through Harvard
Yeah.
Square.
I think it was the 98 tax day blizzard that he finally lost his mind about this. Because I remember it was tax day, because I remember like trudging to the
Caucus
office.
was governor. Caucus was governor, that's all I remember.
Yeah. No, so okay, this was from Walton. Anyway, be that as it may, we all know how to go.
Yeah, we're on it. Should we have you introduce and say
Why
kind of your
not?
level of familiarity
So
with
cozy.
universal design?
Yeah.
Okay, so could you all introduce yourselves and tell us your familiarity of universal design, if it's relevant, why you decided to come, what you're looking for today, just so that we can guide this to make it a little more artisanal.
Will it be like goat cheese at the end?
I hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Actually,
I got to be
you get to meet the goat,
I do.
like on Portlandia and the chicken. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
All right, you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm Adam Bornstein. I'm a faculty member at COGOD. I'm teaching grad students who are on the cusp of either getting an MBA program or not. And I find that a lot of the students are kind of there but not there, and so I want to get them more engaged so that it's not just one directional and they're not like looking really seeing. So just trying to get new ideas.
So you're not here for the disability-related reason, you're here because you want to be a better teacher and engage your students more, and
And just kind of see how else we can use
That's great.
art.
Happy day.
that's
Yeah.
great, that's
Other
perfect,
ways
it's a great
to do
piece.
I'm gonna have to stick around extra goat cheese.
Excellent. You want to go?
Sure. I'm Izzy Stern. I'm the program coordinator for the American University Experience, or AUX. We work very closely with Joy to strive to make our course universally designed and accessible for all users.
I'm Brianna Wiedock. I also teach in the AUX program. I am fairly familiar with universal design, but I think that there's always more that I can learn, so I'm always looking for more tips.
Excellent.
I'm Carol Ito, I'm a librarian, and I second what you said. I just want to keep up with things. I focus on diverse populations and their information needs, and so anything that you can do to reach people where they are is what I want to be able to do.
I'm Robin Barr, I'm linguist in residence and in the World Languages and Cultures Department. I teach in the TESOL program pretty much. Most of my students are graduate students. A lot of them I've discovered have undiagnosed learning disabilities, and since they either come from abroad or they did not were not diagnosed with these disabilities when they were in public school, it cost them too much to get a certificate. And a lot of them were not aware that they had, I should mention, I also teach about multiple intelligences and learning styles, and I also teach adult dyslexics, and so I know about some learning disabilities. When they have undiagnosed learning disabilities, they're surprised to find out about it, but sometimes they're relieved. But what do I do then? And some of the disabilities I'm coming across are not dyslexia, there's something else, like a specific language impairment. Now, these are people who are future teachers of English. So what do I do at this point?
Absolutely, absolutely agree. So people generally, it seems like, are here to become better teachers and to try to reach the maximum number of students. Is that a fair assessment?
We guessed right.
Yay.
This is our tribe.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's nice.
In the session, these are the objectives for today. We're going to introduce the concept of universal design for learning at a really high level for those of you who this is newer to. We're going to talk about some common instructional challenges that we hear when we work with faculty or that we ourselves have experienced. Everybody on the panel today is also an instructor, as well as our roles in other places at AU. We'll do some brainstorming and have some opportunities for you guys to share ideas, suggestions, or questions. At the end, we'll have an open discussion. We can talk about whatever you want. Since we have such a small group, we can make this, very intimate and kind of drive it around your interests. But we also have a few things up here on the slides that we want to kind of share with you as some examples and best practices. Should we introduce ourselves?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah. Now that I've introduced everything else. I'm Joy Adams. I'm an instructional designer. I work in the library in the e-learning office or Blackboard support.
And I'm Marianne Thompson. I lead the Academic Support and Access Center here at AU, which does academic support for all students, provides accommodations for students with disabilities. And so we're somewhat universally designed in that way. And then specialized support for student athletes. And I actually teach as well at GW in the Master's in Higher Ed program.
Hi, I'm Lara Schwartz. I teach in government, and I'm sort of a groupie for the parts of our university community, as well as the library, actually. When the revolution comes, the library will run the school. But I'm sort of a groupie for these things, and someone who's very much interested in really the pedagogical component of what our job is here as teachers and as a university. I'm a disabled person, and I've been a disability advocate for a very long time. And so as well, my interest in universal design coming out of, advocating under the ADA as a litigator and for disability as an advocate, makes it such that when I look at AU, the idea of an AU that works is cued around universal design. So a cool thing is that these guys have been already fostering opportunities to make that connection from kind of the services and the programs that they offer to the faculty and student experience. And that's, I think, this panel is actually part of that journey. So that's the deal.
All right, so we'll get started a little bit and talk about what universal design is. So for those of you that don't know, I think it's helpful to talk about how it started out with physical architecture. So you want to think about Mary Graydon Center has stairs that enter the front, right? So we need to create a ramp so that someone who can't take stairs has an option to get in. To look at then SIS, where everyone just goes in the door the same way. So we don't need to create an accommodation like a ramp because we've created access that anyone can use regardless. It's better for caterers, it's better for people in wheelchairs, it's better for people pushing strollers, it's better for people who just don't want to take stairs that day. And it really creates an open environment. And I think when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, so much on this campus right now, universal design is really important because one of the things that I've seen physically is a student who needs to take the ramp. The group of friends is coming up to MGC and one group of friends goes up and that other person has to take the other route. Or from the ASAC, we know that most of the students with physical disabilities on campus, you actually can't see the physical disability. So I think it's a common misperception that people who need to use ramps, you can always tell who it is. So you see people go up, someone struggle with that social issue of like, I need this to go over here. And that's in a building where it's obvious where the ramp is. So I think it's good to think physically about the issues. And do we have any baseball fans in the room? No? Okay.
The Red Sox are doing well.
Good, okay.
Yes.
Anyone, people who've at least been to that stadium? Someone? Okay.
Yeah.
So very universally designed. There aren't stairs, right? You kind of go up. So that way it helps, exactly. So traffic flows better. They did it both because of universal design, but also just because it makes an easier place. It makes it easier to navigate, right? So that's what we're looking for in terms of learning environments. We're looking for learning environments that don't segregate people because of how their bodies or their brains are made. We're looking for environments that don't advantage or disadvantage different groups of people. And for ones where we can create the best experience for everyone. And I think a lot of times, and I'll talk a little bit more about disability accommodations, faculty members feel this tension of like, am I advantaging one person? Like everyone might like this thing, and universal design would say, okay, give it to them. But the idea here is to create one environment that's actually better for everyone. And I think that MGC SIS physical example is a helpful one to go back to, is that it doesn't hurt people who can use stairs to go into SIS. I've never heard someone complain that they wish SIS had stairs that you can enter, right? So anyway, that's a start to it. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that as somebody who is physically disabled, First Hall isn't possible,
Right.
but even the language lab, which I should be able to use, it has a wheelchair outside thing. I don't use a wheelchair,
Right.
but I can't use the stairs, so I can't get to the language lab.
And I think just a little cue, because not everybody's coming from a disability space. You know, you might have noticed or might not, that Robin and I both use the term disabled. We both describe ourselves as disabled. And one of the things, just to start with, as you engage with your students and the people in your space, is that people are going to vary on their self-description. What we did, you know, I refer to as person-centered language. You hear a lot about person-first language. You know, I'm a person. Oh, don't say disabled person. Say person. Don't say a, you know, autistic person. Say a person with autism. And that's a very changing landscape. But as well, the thing that I would encourage instead of person-first language is person-centered language. In other words, meeting the person where they are and saying, how do you refer to yourself? Not I'm a person with autism and visual disability, which you might think, having heard that that's what people want. And they say, I'm autistic and blind, and that's where you're going to be at. It's
Because
just
otherwise it's a taboo, and you don't want that.
it's almost like mispronouncing something that someone
Are we
is.
actually allowed to ask if someone has disabilities, or we're not? I mean,
No.
I
No,
don't know.
I
So
think that's a great way to bring in universal design again, is that it's always, we all like being able to describe what we are, right? Or who we are and what our identities are. I think we've all been in that case where someone's like, I mean, I happen to be fairly loud. And it bugs me when people are like, well, you're really loud. I'm like, well, wait till I say it first. You know what I mean? And so I think it's really good to, it just, in terms of a universal design thing to say, I think it'd be helpful for the class to introduce themselves and tell us anything relevant that we might need to know about you. And then it's up to that person. I think just with anything, it's going to be really person specific.
Yeah.
And to find out if it's relevant.
So I'm just cueing that. So.
All right, so let's get into like the specifics of what I guess some of the deeper parts of what universal design is, and it's basically 3 different things. And if you have this handout, it'll correspond, and this will actually be our next slide. So the what of learning is kind of what you're learning. Are you learning texts? Are you learning films? What are you trying to learn? And then how you do that in a universally designed way, and we'll make this much more concrete as we go forward, is you want to represent the what of learning many ways. So if you're learning about World War II, can you read a text? Can you also watch a movie? Can you also read a screenplay? Can you, that's good enough for 1 cup of coffee. But can you learn about one thing in multiple different ways, okay? And then the next thing is how the learning. So, and they're all very tied, but can students engage with the material in multiple different ways? So can they engage with it in a group project? Can they engage with it by doing a presentation? Can they engage with it by writing a paper? So many ways we only ask students to engage with things by speaking verbally in class and by answering questions on an exam. And so those are the only ways that they're like, or just reading a textbook. Those are the only ways that they're kind of getting messy with our material. And then next is that, and so that's the how that they're learning. And then the why of learning is getting to the point of how do we get students more engaged. And the why of learning, I think too often we say, well, you're learning this because it's a gen ed course, or it's in the core curriculum, or it's required, or everyone takes AUX. And so that's one why. So it's universal design wouldn't say throw anything out, but it would say that's only one of the reasons you're in the class. And I think one of the issues that I at GW always teach a required class. And so this piece is really key for me is that, yes, you're in this because you have to be, but also I want to show you why you should engage in this because it's really relevant to you. So I want to bring in stories from practice. I want to engage with what you're doing in work so that it matters with course content, to give people multiple ways to learn and to be motivated by that. So they don't feel like they're just learning so that they can get an A in the class and boost their GPA. That's a fine reason, but that's not the only reason. Anything else to add with that?
I would just say that one of the things that's really powerful about this is when we consider that we have these 3 different neural networks. If we can engage all 3, we optimize the learning experience. So when we kind of try to touch on each of these issues, giving students different ways of taking in material, giving them different ways of expressing their knowledge and mastery, and then giving them different reasons to be engaged and active, that creates an optimal learning experience. So it's not just about meeting a need or a deficit, it's about making learning as efficient and effective as possible.
And again, this works for everyone. So these are good things for all people. Yeah. So this is those guidelines, and you all have them in a way that's easier to read. We also have them on the site. But these are just examples of how to get a bit deeper in this. And this is one of the things that I would recommend that you look at your course. And you don't have to do all of these things, but if you can make it 50% better, so if you can add 2 or 3 of these ideas to your course in each column, you will probably be in a better space than you are right now. So I think try to think about things that you might do for this fall semester that are the low-hanging fruit, and then what are some things that are more aspirational going forward. All right, so we have some scenarios, and what we're really interested in is hearing your scenarios as well, because a big part of my job is talking to faculty online that are stuck on some student case. So I used to work in the Dean of Students Office, and I talked to a lot of faculty who were stuck on some student case, and then now in the disability realm, I'm doing the same thing. And I think we really want to hear what you're stuck with as well. But one of the things that I hear really commonly from faculty is I'm getting these accommodation letters from all these different students, and I'm getting them at various times of the semester. It'd be one thing if I got all of the accommodation letters 3 months in advance when I was planning my course, and I could figure this all out. But I'm getting them in November. I'm getting them in the middle of the term, and I don't know what to do with that, and it's and I don't want to mess it up. And I would say that I completely get that, but that's where universal design is really going to help you, is that if you can think of some of the common accommodations, so note taker in the classroom, audio recording is becoming a bigger one because we're actually instituting just for a side note, but this pen that you can write with and it audio records while you're writing, and then you can go back and press that area and just hear that piece of audio recording again. Other common ones might be extended time on exams, ability to talk to the faculty about missing class if that's going to need to happen, extended deadlines, that conversation with the faculty. You all, if you've been teaching for a few years, you know these common accommodations. So I would say start your semester thinking of what am I probably going to be hit up with? And then what ways can I think about adding those accommodations into the course so that it actually is taken care of? So I love things that talk about like, this paper needs to be due at some time during these 2 weeks. Because then a student, just like as adults, like I know I need to go to the dentist. It doesn't have to happen tomorrow, but it probably should happen in the next month. So I regulate myself and figure out when's the optimal time to do that. We hear a lot about student stress. and overwhelm and all of this. And if you give students more that's in their wheelhouse and say, I'll take the paper at the beginning of, or I'll take it October 15th if you just need to get off your plate. I'll also take it October 31st. So, and that way it gives the student who has disabilities, a lot of physical disabilities play out like this, where I'm thinking of Crohn's disease, where you could be feeling fine and then all of a sudden feel horrible for a week. And so they can't plan, okay, that's gonna be a bad week for me. And so that student, if I was advising them from the disability perspective, I would say, well, then you need to be the type that turns it in October 15th. And then if you need to, you can turn it in on the 31st. So it allows students to kind of self-regulate. Another piece would be with exams. So instead of saying we're going to give our exam in class for an hour on Tuesday, think instead, like, what am I actually trying to measure? Am I trying to measure whether someone got a good night's sleep the night before or if they got in a fight with their mother? Am I trying to measure how good they are in the afternoon? Am I trying to measure really how well they do under time pressure? Probably not, actually. Most of us don't teach emergency room medicine. And so time pressure is not the most important thing. And I will say, supervising a large team, the ability of someone to work under time pressure, it's important in some of the roles. It's definitely not the most important thing. And so what's more important is, can you use resources wisely? Can you write well? Can you express original ideas? So go back to original content and then think about how you can give that person multiple options there. So take-home exams are a great option. I think people often worry about academic integrity. But if you write a difficult exam or you are actually looking for original thought, you don't have to worry about it, right? I would worry about academic integrity if you're giving multiple choice tests. But if you're asking for original content and deep learning, a take-home exam is much more realistic to what they're going to need to do in the world. So, and then that takes out completely the need for additional time for exams. So does that make sense as we think about accommodations in the classroom?
And that's a great time to plug how great Blackboard can be to offer that mode of exam. It makes it 1,000 times easier.
And I think one thing that's really important, and I love this quote on this handout that we've provided you. The quotes that you see here in this orange column are from some folks who piloted our online Blackboard course that all of you are welcome to join and take a look at. But one of our pilot instructors, Marnie Twig from College Writing, said, a lot of instructors think about accommodations as extra work they have to do. UDL helps us reframe that conversation. We're improving our teaching for all students. So when you think about something like captions or transcripts, that's not only going to benefit the student who might have a hearing impairment. I have to watch television with the captions on because I have ADD and I can't pay attention. So I put the captions on. It helps me stay more engaged, and almost everything I watch is on BBC, and I can't understand what they're saying half the time anyway. So it's very helpful. And I think a lot of people have different modalities in which they're more comfortable learning. And so by giving the student the video with the captions or the transcripts, you're letting them choose what works best for them and giving them opportunities to try to learn different ways. You know, a lot of our students are brand new to this and they haven't done a lot of reflexive thinking about the type of learners they are and what's most effective for them. So by giving them opportunities to try some different things, you might also help promote a little self-discovery in terms of what's most efficient and effective for them.
And I think it also helps the faculty member major dilemma of like, I'm basically by mid-semester giving 6 different independent studies because students are asking to complete this course in so many different ways, and I feel like I'm really letting my standards go. And I completely understand that. And so if you have a syllabus that's universally designed that provides a lot of options, it's a lot easier to say to the student who comes to you on the October 31st and is like, I need a 2-week extension, to say, why? Why couldn't you have done it on the 15th? And I think it's also incumbent on a faculty member to talk about in the beginning why you gave that 2-week window, to say, like, if you think you're going to be a person that needs extensions, plan on turning it on the 15th. But then it's a lot easier to say no later. Of course, there are times that you still need to bend. But it allows you to actually have higher standards if we allow students, if we build that flexibility that we already say is fundamentally
Yeah,
fair.
I think this is a really important thing, and I'm thinking about, you know, COGOD, you're trying to get people to go out into this world, and these standards are so high, and they're, you know, it's not very huggy. And you can hear this as like, I've just collapsed and said, oh, everybody can, use modeling clay, and I don't like that. But what I've found, and we're gonna do some specifics, what I've found is that you can raise your standards significantly when you offer people tools to demonstrate competence and fluency in the material that are de-linked from your well, people give exams and that's an idea I had because I had to do it, de-linked from kind of ritual and tradition and linked much more directly to your demands, your material, your learning outcomes, to where my universally designed assessments and exercises are harder. And I can come away, my class that's been most effectively universally designed from last semester, and we'll talk about the level of achievement that I saw out of Clueless Freshman, honestly, the level of achievement because of these changes was far, far higher. And we're going to talk about this, far more uniform. In other words, not the 4 students who make you go, I'm not going to quit or start eating my feelings, but the whole class. Not that any of us want to quit or eat our feelings, but you know what I mean? You go from oh, Sparky's why I do this to everybody is doing it. So this is not a rigor lowering thing.
So we'll hand the mic to Lara to talk a little bit about her amazing strategies for encouraging class participation.
Yeah, can we go to the, okay, so the scenario is, I love, this is, by the way, joy is a joy because, I think, and I want to get feedback on this, but from my perspective, oftentimes a class can have that quality, especially if you come in and you're I'm a good teacher type. And what you'll find is, yeah, my good teacher typeness engaged, certain people who might be engaged or who were really kind of in my space. And you might notice I'm a little high strung, so enthusiastic people. And I got a few more by being fascinating, and I'm gonna have some left behinders, and some of them will come to office hours, and there's gonna be this big mix. And for me, learning to take my teaching upward has been trying to get more evenness in that. And there are reasons, obviously, we can talk about. Would you mind?
Next.
So let's just talk about that quickly from our artisanal participants. Why do you want your students to participate in class, if you do? Yeah.
I require them to participate in groups and so forth because it's important for future teachers to know how other people are learning. So for me, I'm not grading them on their participation. I want them to share their differing views of how they're interacting with the material. I guess we solve problems in class, language problems in class. And so everybody's astonished to discover that this person over here solves it vertically and someone over here solves it horizontally. Okay, so to me, that's why I need people to participate. Otherwise, I could just be up there talking.
You want them to practice that skill of managing, in a classroom, being able to work with other people who are.
Okay, yeah. So there's also the group work is important. You need to be able to collaborate as a future teacher. All those good things. But in terms of interacting with the material, that's part of why I want them to participate. Is because that's a way of actually learning the material better, being able to explain how you did it.
So anyone else, why do you for instance, grade have a class participation grade component in what you do?
I have a similar thing. I like them to participate so that they can aspire to the understanding what other students are looking at in terms of this is why I'm in this class for one student, and this is where I want to go with my life or my job, and therefore that might inspire another student to say, oh, I never thought about it that way. So it's a way they can sort of share ideas, but just inspire each other to be more engaged.
Great. And yeah, and so and those things, what I hear when you say that is it's actually tied to learning outcomes. You want people to be engaged. Joy will talk about student engagement. You want them to, in some way, for the linguistics teaching TESOL, you wanting to get people, there's a class participation component that's actually a part of fluency and getting good at this. Some other things for me, I'm just going to put that out there because learning outcomes are important, right? Marianne introduced the why. So some other components of learning outcome of this for me are I think you touched on this, you know, there's the unsung hero component. One of the worst experiences from my perspective that you can have is at the end of the semester getting a brilliant final from someone who didn't speak much. And you realize that something about their not participating robbed the learning community of their insight. So it's what the learning community can have as a result of everyone. It's engagement. It's not fun to be that person not talking in class when there's, you know, the four who none of us worry about. Another is the learning outcome for the talkers, the people who really participate a ton, who might be getting into a habit of not being in the class to listen and learn, but being in the class to pour forth. So there are a lot of reasons. And then there's, you know, we know this, and Marianne actually knows it at a more expert level than me, but we know that doing this, saying this, much like taking certain notes when you read, increases your fluency. I've said this, I've then had it challenged. Also, I don't like getting up and doing a soft chew for an hour. So you wanna slide me? Okay. So artisanal. What do you think are the reasons people don't participate? Can we have the speaker notes or no? Or does that run in?
Are there some?
I put some on there.
Oh.
Okay, but no worries.
Are you sure?
No worries.
Okay.
So from reasons that people don't participate, a lot of people think that not participating comes from not being ready entirely. Now, not being ready, like not having done the reading, is a huge component. So one of the yes.
Ah. Yes.
And you know what was great about that? It was very like the kind of feedback that I give on Blackboard. It's like question oriented, like what do you suppose, you know, would happen if someone challenged you in the following way instead of like, no. Okay, so challenges with material or not reading are big ones, and that's why, for me, a component, and I'd like to consider that to you, a component of class participation is preparing the students to participate in class. And there's a part of that involves really priming them, which includes getting the reading done. But there are a number of reasons. And I'd say imposter syndrome is a really big deal at AU. People are nodding. I think the students here that I get as freshmen, I'm kind of the freshman Girl Scout leader. It's like using the copier, like being able to fix the copier, and all of a sudden everyone wants you to, and so I'm good with freshmen, and there I am. But imposter syndrome is big here. I think about 40% of early students here feel like everybody else is smarter and they know things and they've already been in debate club and everybody else has already learned something and is going to get a sticker for already knowing it. And I don't, and there might be things both from, like, let's say my ethnic dialect or my not very good high school and stuff that puts me behind. 40% think they're here to get a sticker, like, I'm amazing, I did debate club, I took the AP version of this, etc. You know, let me show you this. And 20% are like, I guess this is school and I have to try and get things done, and here I am. And my sense of moving toward class participation is getting everybody into that middle block. That's the truth of college. And some people have varying degrees of readiness. We see that in their writing fluency, depending on a lot of things. But these are other reasons, uncommon or unpopular opinions, if you're coming to 11 o'clock about tough conversations. Challenges with material, not reading. So these are some reasons.
I think we often assume if someone doesn't participate, it's because they didn't do the work, or they don't understand the work. And it might be, but that's again how you can raise the standards, is that if you give people multiple ways to participate, and they don't take you up on any of them, well, then you can really lower that participation grade. But I know for me, I've always had course engagement as a huge aspect of my class. It's really hard to give people low scores on that unless you have the information to back it up.
Yeah, and one of the things we don't want, so this comes back to learning outcomes. This comes back to why you want participation. If you're not giving a class participation grade because you accurately believe that it's wrong to have your course be a personality contest, that you know that being an outgoing person or having a certain kind of confidence or being more of an emoter than a listener is not what you want to grade, first of all, congratulations, you're really thinking about learning outcomes. It's very important. But if you're not, because you feel like class participation can only be a popularity contest, and only assess those things that you don't want to assess rightly, What I want to offer is some ways that, since we know class participation is actually good and enriches, you can take that. And one thing you might try is a pilot semester where you work to increase engagement and participation. And then if you feel like I got it, then you can start assessing it. And I'm going to talk to you about different ways to assess it that are multimodal too. So reading journals are reflections. Blackboard actually has an opportunity that's very, very easy to create something that you can look at, and a required journal where you have the number of entries you'd like. It can be once a week, it could be every 2 weeks, it could be rotating in groups, where the students have to say, you know, here's a thing about the reading. Mine, I say shoot for, 200 words. I mean, it's very short, and I'll show you what I mean. And if they've already written, some people take class notes. I mean, some people take reading notes. Oh, and I have my reading notes, and then I come in with my reading notes, and I try and bring them into the class. And sometimes you'll find that unsung hero has massive reading notes they've never brought to they've brought them physically. But what you're saying is, you know what? Take the thoughts that you have that feel important and put a couple of them here. And it sounds like a lot of grading, but it's not. Mine are like, did you, didn't you? Did you, 1 point? Did you sort of write some stuff, but let's be real, you didn't read, half a point, it didn't happen, 0. And it can be like this. Now, I offer feedback often. It can be a really quick, like Joy did with the slide. What about the Smith article? Does that challenge what you just said? It's really fast. For me, a 30-person class going through all of the reading journals before class is about a half-hour, 35-minute exercise. And the thing that's fantastic, and you use a rubric, so you can click. Joy has stuff for you. The thing that's fantastic about it is I know for a fact that takes a half hour out of my lecture / course prep because I've primed other people to be in it. Small discussion sessions outside of class. If you have a GFAP assistant, some people use, this becomes very easy. They lead a discussion. But you can say, like, once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'm going to actually block an hour of my office hours and make it a group. Everybody, we're talking about supply and demand. We're talking about TESOL intersection with disability. We're doing that. Let's do that. So that's one way. Class participation questions on the syllabus, which I'm going to show you an example. In other words, I believe, does anyone here feel like in class what they want to assess is whether people can guess which component of the reading is what you really needed them to get out of it? Like, do you feel like you're assessing that? Like, Joey was best at knowing that when she read chapter 7, that the part about it that I really wanted her to engage with was, page 89. Does anybody feel like that's what they're assessing? Maybe occasionally, maybe with an exam, but most of the time what you'd like to be able to do is come in and have people on the topic that you're here for, like the purpose, like why did we read? And I also on my syllabi every week, there's a thematic name of the class. So it's not just, and I do things by week, it's not just for page, for Tuesday read chapter 7. It's this week is, I'm talking about the role of truth in governing. Being transparent. Individualized class participation assignments. Maybe you have that unsung hero. Maybe she comes to office hours. Or maybe you just want to reach out to her by email. And what I'll do is I'll say, Penelope, it's really Madison. I'll say, Madison, it's 2017. I'll say, Madison, I feel like, you have something to say, and I'd like you to get into that space, and here's an idea. You know that we're all talking about Texas v. Johnson on Friday. You're going to be my first Socratic person. I'd like you to know the holding I'm going to call on you. It's not making it easier. It's getting her ready to practice. If any of you have ever gone to a gym or worked with a trainer or done a sport or music you start with scales, gym you lift the small weight. We always start everything expecting your students to have every skill established when we come in. We don't expect them to have established understanding of the material, the content. In fact, it's kind of tough for us when they believe they do, when we have to go like, hey, engage, think critically. So expecting them to have an established skill of participation, it's not consistent with that. So you can say, Penelope, let's try something. I want you more in the mix. And I'll often say, is there a reason this wouldn't be okay for you? And then they might bring in disability or social anxiety, and you go from there. The journals, 2 approaches. One approach is what I use both actually in my CLEG, Intro to CLEG class. I ask them for an I noticed and I wondered, by which I mean, and it's very explicit on my syllabus. Give me 2 things. Something you noticed that stood out to you about the reading. You know, this is basically what it's about. I noticed that, you know, there was a general theme. I noticed that the Smith thing was troubling to me. It seemed very oriented toward only white people, and I felt like it left out this whole thing. And you've got to be ready for the I noticed to be like, this is a problem. But that's critical thinking we're having. And then the I wondered. And the way that I have it for Intro to CLEG, which is a class in learning to say I don't know so that you can be primed to find things out, the way that I have it there is and this is like Craft of Research if anyone uses that book, tell me something that after reading you don't know about the topic and that it would be useful to know to become an expert or a better person in this topic and why. So you might say, now that I've read this thing about the mortgage interest deduction being, you know, regressive, helping people who have more money, I talk about this a lot in my classes. Now that I know that, the thing is I don't know the extent to which other programs, other taxation might fix this. And I need to know this because I can't decide if this policy thing is hurting people or hurting a specific group of people until I kind of know a bigger landscape. So when I wonder, like, why did I wonder? Why did I wonder if there's a racial thing missing from this reading? Why would it help? So that's all. You can do that. I tell them you can do it in bullets. Another is a specific question. So there are times that my journal will say, and I'm being very law and econ, but you know, look, in class we're doing this lesson where we're going to figure out whether it's efficient for someone to build a fence between their golf driving range that they built and the house with the big glass wall windows, and how much we should spend on it. This is like just a law and economics thing. And I want you to start thinking about that, and I want you to make a list of all of the things you would need to know before you decide about building this fence. So sometimes I do something very specific. Both things, and they're mixed in my syllabus. Can you just Yes, ma'am. This is an example what I say when I mean class participation prep questions. So you'll see that for September 1st in American Constitution, I've given a title. What is Friday, September 1st about? It's about overall what it means to study law. This is a law class that's the foundational one before upper level constitutional law. So here's what you're reading. Class discussion prep. Early on for a lower level class especially, I divide people into groups so that one group I can say like, okay, be ready to be called on Socratically for like half of the material. It doesn't mean don't read the other half, but it takes the temperature down. So class discussion prep, be ready to explain X, be ready to explain Y. And I'll say often, be ready to discuss National League of Cities v. Usury. Be ready to explain what would have happened if the court had gone with this concurring opinion. Be ready to explain, etc. And in this one, I'm preparing them for a skill, which is briefing a case. So I'm really out there with what that means. That's a very extensive class discussion prep. Sometimes it's be ready to explain that supply and demand might not be as easy as it seems. Be ready to explain that. And it cues people, look, the class is about how to read an opinion. And when I say how to read an opinion, these are the components. Another slide.
I think this also shows how doing universal design is more owning this, that it's more work up front. So writing this is a lot more work than just providing those readings. But then once you've done that work, then you're off to the races once the semester starts and we all get busy. So I think this is a great example of something to do. Once you've taught the same class for 3 or 4 years and you need to breathe some life into it, that you've already done that work, so add in these course discussion things. And then
and to challenge that a little, one thing that I do that actually helps with universal design, I think as well, is my syllabi are Google Docs. My syllabi are Google Docs. I often have TBD on the reading, which, it means in August you don't have to be finding like the exact reading you're going to do on November 5th, which is nice. And for me, I teach things that can be very current. Supreme Court decision might have come down, a bill might be introduced, somebody might have said something stupid on Twitter. There's lots of things that might happen. But so, if I make sure, because I don't see, my students, maybe yours are different, don't read 2 weeks ahead or do their journals 2 weeks ahead. I mean, there's always that one person, right? I put my syllabus up and a little Blackboard thing up in like July for one of my classes, and I got a question about it from a student. I hadn't emailed them, but they had already checked Blackboard to see what, Professor Schwartz is doing. It's terrifying.
Tell my students they're not allowed to read ahead.
So there you go. But what you can do is you can say, if I have next week's classes done, or you can, if your lecture kind of, you have in your mind what you plan to do on Friday the 2nd or whatever it was, as long as you're a class ahead, say, okay, if I have a Tuesday, Friday class, by Tuesday, my Friday, what to think about questions are up, you're fine. You can do that across the semester. And Google Docs are great, and one reason they are a universal design thing is that if you like to do syllabus updates or you like to add things, content to Blackboard or things like that, sometimes students get really confused by that. They get confused about their email. I have very explicit policies about you have to read your email, suck it up, buttercup, you're going to have a job someday. But if you have one document, and I'm very explicitly saying bookmark it on your browser, if you have one thing that can be changing without confusion, without, oh, am I supposed to, which document is the current one? You not only give yourself time to say, I don't need the readings for the day after Thanksgiving. I don't need the questions nailed that far down on August 28th. So I'm just putting that out there. I really recommend it, and it's really universally designed in the sense that people have one thing. It's for attention deficit, for the challenges of English language, of reading new emails and having to parse out, like, what does he mean? There was a change. Which document is it? It's like, nope. It's just look here, seek, and you shall find in this exact one place. And what's great is if you get new readings that are, PDF or something that you've put on Blackboard under content, you just add it and go, it's on Blackboard under content. You don't have to email it. You don't have to have them hunt around on Blackboard. And so
I would just say, I think that the only pushback to that is that for a lot of students with disabilities, they want to be able to plan. So they want to be able to say, like, especially if you're going to need to caption videos, if we're going to need to make PDFs accessible for students. So I think if possible, the more upfront you can be, so that way, again, someone has it in their own hands, because it is a little bit of a disaster in our office if we find, like, if people are changing things a lot and we're having to
but if you do need to change, if you can have it at least in one place. And mine's all done for the semester. What I'm just saying is, if you wanted to give it a try, or you can do the class before, you can make a slide and say, hey, everybody, just so you know, Friday we're going to talk about this thing. So there's many ways. It doesn't have to be on your syllabus. It can be guys, gals, and others. Friday, we're going to, the thing in chapter 7, there's this table. I'm going to be talking about what it means. Like, really focus on that. I'm going to ask you about that. It can be, so that can be multimodal too. Many ways of approaching it. And then I want to also get to alternatives as well.
Can you link to a Google Doc on Blackboard? So I can just put there, when it says syllabus, I can just put that.
Or on content, another thing you can do is content. There are many, many options, and one of them is web link.
Right, I know about that, so I can do that.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. So these are ways to prime people, right? I've said you can make them write something about their reading in advance. And if you don't want to grade it and give feedback, you can make them do it and just check that it's there. Like the fact that they've done it. You could just say, like, it's 10 points across the semester you've done, whatever you want to do. Or I'm just going to check it on it, whatever it is. Because if they've had to write a sentence. And I'll say the other thing about the course journal I neglected to mention, I apologize. It can get you the unsung hero. Because what I do across the semester then, try and look at the course journals that I've gotten by the time I'm doing prep for my class meeting. And what I'll do is I'll grab something compelling out of the journals, and I'll generally choose one from a quiet person. And I'll put it up on my slide or in my notes that I'm doing for that day, and I'll say, like, Luis wrote blah blah. Here's something I've just pulled out. He made this claim, or he asked this question. Quite compelling. Let's spend some time on it. And we've just gotten Luis into that space, who was wonderful and hasn't spoken before. People are going to ask him questions. People are going to have a regard for him. He's hearing from me, like, I want you here, and you got it. You're getting it. And if you can give feedback on the course journals, incidentally, it's one way to do individualized class participation. You know, Malik, I would love it if you shared this insight tomorrow. Right? So then we have, if you're going to assess it as well, or if you just really want this, and this is UDL for everything from disability to imposter syndrome, shyness, language, all of the reasons we've come up with. Not great for not preparing, but you've primed them for preparing. So these are some methods that I recommend that become alternatives to just being that guy who always, you know, has his hand up. Socratic method or modified Socratic, you know, I come out of law, meaning I'm going to cold call you. And you have to have a real sensitivity to where people are at for that. Get that person that you know is on the edge, the person that sometimes has leaned forward a little, and then Sparky raised his hand, and you know, and Aiden leaned back. So get that person you knew was on the edge of participating. Socratic method. Modified Socratic method. I'm going to break you into small groups. You guys are going to have to answer this question. You guys are going to have to answer this question. Take 5-7 minutes, and then come back and be like, okay, team one, what did Justice Scalia, you know, say? Modified. Or modified in the sense of, remember, we've come back with this, you know what, you know, Alicia, I want you to answer this question on Friday. Be ready for it. And I'll often say, if you're not positive that you've got it right, just send me an email, ping me. Is this right? Yes, no. I offer Blackboard discussions, and I call it part of your class participation grade. I put up a discussion forum that's like stuff that happened in class and encourage people. The person who's that very good listener, who's getting a ton out of class, but isn't that person that sort of vomits it forth, say, do me a favor, you know, get that idea, you know, up onto the Blackboard discussion. You know, it really interested me when Luis said blah, blah, and as I thought about it, etc. I also have a Blackboard discussion that's an opportunity to give, a reading, contribute a reading. And this can be great for unpopular opinions. I want you to see what this guy who's, you know, Republican senator of whatever he is, a communist leader. Self-assessment and learning goals work. You do frequent Blackboard check-ins in quiz format. Is something, can you tell me, is something interfering with your ability to participate here? What do I need to know? Class participation teams, I mentioned. Note takers. Sometimes people, for the purpose of either disability or nervousness about missing something, are so embedded in the note process that they're not in the participation process. I ban laptops for everyone but one person a day. I have a voluntary sign-up sheet for the laptop note taker, who then sends it posts a link as a Google Doc to a universal set of notes. All of my students have class notes that someone has scrupulously made, one person a day voluntarily, because you might have a barrier to being that person. Voluntarily, that everybody has. They can scribble on their own notepads if they want. And the idea is do an incredible job at this so that everyone can be in the moment. It also prevents, if you have a laptop ban, from students with disabilities having to out themselves when they have an exception. Saying, okay, the first 10 minutes of my next class, we're actually going to come back to what we did in this class for further thoughts. And I apologize, that went long. Yeah, I think that was all I had.
I believe so.
Sorry about that.
So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, and in doing that, I'm also going to plug my services. I'm available to consult with any of you, AU faculty or staff who would like some assistance, particularly in terms of utilizing our academic technology. But also, I am a former college professor, and I'm currently an adjunct instructor of geography at the University of Maryland. I teach fully online classes, so I'm available to consult with you on other things you might wish to discuss, including the things I'm going to share with you right now. So one of the challenges I have is that the class I teach is a gen ed core course. So a lot of the students in my classes are not geography majors. They don't even know that geography is more than memorizing state and world capitals, and they're not there because they want to be there, they're there because they feel like they have to be there. So I have an extra challenge that many of you face in that I'm not preaching to the choir. I'm trying to bring folks in. And this is particularly important in my discipline because very few people are declared geography majors when they start college because they don't know what geography is. And so when we get one, it's like Bigfoot. We're like, oh my God, I've got a freshman on my roster who's declared geography major. Like, it's super exciting. So this is how we get people into our discipline, is the class I teach. So there's a lot of pressure on me to make it like cool and interesting and fun. And I like things to be cool and interesting and fun for myself too. So student engagement is really important to me because it also keeps me engaged. So I want to share just a couple of strategies and a couple philosophies with you. And the first is thinking about the idea of active learning. And I wanted to actually, sorry, it was like fading in. I wanted to have you guys speak to this. I have a definition. When I share the presentation with you, you'll be able to read this. I don't know why the image isn't showing up, but tell me a little bit about how do you guys think about active learning? What does that mean to you?
They're not Coke bottles that I'm filling with information. They're I don't know. I'm assisting them to build something, or I'm coaching them on a team, or something like that. They're doing the work.
Absolutely. It's really about getting students to be active consumers and active creators of knowledge, not just passively receiving, not just us telling them, but thinking about ourselves as facilitators, letting students kind of take the lead. When I share out the presentation, there's a few definitions here I think some of y'all will find interesting, but I think we kind of get the idea, so I'm not going to belabor this point. We think about active learning, sometimes it's hard to operationalize that. So I'm sharing with you a definition from Quality Matters. It's a nonprofit dedicated to promoting excellence in online education, but this applies to any teaching. That when you think about activities and active learning, you might want to think about this in terms of interactions. Right? And when we talk about interactions, good interactions will support the course outcomes and competencies. So it's not just activity for activity's sake, but activity in the service of achieving the outcomes of the course. And there's no one right way to do this, right? The approach has to vary in terms of the discipline, the purpose, and the level of the course you're teaching. The type of active learning you're going to do in a class of graduate students who are all majoring in the same thing, it's going to be really different than what you're going to need to do in a gen ed class. And again, you don't want to just throw in stuff for the sake of throwing in it. There should be a purpose to this. So this is, I'm not going to talk through these, I just want to illustrate to you that there's a lot of different ways to implement interactive learning, and they almost kind of follow this 3-column thing. And did you notice the colors? Right? Okay. So instructional design. So when you think about interaction, there's 3 kind of big ways you can think about interaction. How students are interacting with the content, right? How are we representing information? It could be reading an assignment, it could also be watching a video, it could be working on problems, it could be doing a lab exercise or some kind of application, it could be engaging with some interactive multimedia type things. There's more than one way to present content. It doesn't always have to be a lecture, and it doesn't always have to be text. That's what we're talking about when we talk about learner-content interaction. There's also the interaction we have with our students, the learner-instructor, and it's kind of about making strategic, purposeful learners. We're trying to facilitate and coach our students to be successful, and that comes in the way we interact with them. So that can be having an online presence in your Blackboard course, or if you're teaching fully online, to being available to students for consultation, for office hours, to providing them with rich, individualized feedback on their assignments. That can be done in a variety of different platforms or modes. The way we communicate with students on an everyday basis with announcements and email messages, and so on. And then the third thing you can think about is learner-to-learner interaction. So again, this is kind of going to enhance student engagement. It's going to give them an opportunity to get involved. So how can we get the students talking to and learning from each other? There's tons of different examples up here, and I'm not going to belabor them because my colleagues have already mentioned several of them. And I'm going to give you the link to this presentation, and I want you to come talk to me in my office sometime. So I'm just going to leave that a mystery for you. One way to think about this is one thing that really engages adult learners is understanding what's in it for me. Why am I doing this? This is very fundamental in terms of instructional design. So one approach you can take is thinking about authentic learning. So in your daily job, how often do you take a multiple choice test? Ever? Right? In your daily job, how often does someone just randomly call on you to have you tell them a fact? Right? Well, as a teacher, yeah, you're right. And because I teach geography, I know everything, by the way. Like, yeah, I know all the world capitals, every
No, it's
fact
because you're
about the
joy,
land.
actually.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not Google. I tell them all the time, I'm not Google. So thinking about ways to make learning more authentic. Assessment doesn't always have to mean a multiple choice test. We can think about ways of replicating what students are going to experience in their everyday lives, what they're going to experience as they continue their educational journey, and what they're going to experience in the workplace. And all of those things help engage students because they see the value in doing it. They're not just doing it because to get a grade, right? They're learning something. So when we think about authentic learning, we're talking about giving them real world problems that don't always have clear answers. Some of the students are very uncomfortable with this, but I tell them this is life. Just like everything in life, there is not one correct answer to this question. There are multiple ways of approaching it, and I'm trying to challenge you to think independently, to think critically, and to think like a geographer. That's my job. I don't care if you memorize the stuff because you can Google it later. I want to know that you can think it through, that you can ask the right questions, and you know where to go to get the correct answers. Not that you have it all memorized up in your head. We don't need that anymore. We have Google. There's a couple of different ways to think about this, and I'm sharing with you a taxonomy of significant learning. Dee Fink is also a geographer, so I'm a little positively biased. But you don't have to try to build all 6 of these Trivial Pursuit pieces into your course design, but you might want to think about adding 1 or 2 if you're not already incorporating it into the way you teach and assess your students. So, thinking about building their academic skills, thinking about ways of getting them to think about themselves and others. Nobody likes to talk about anything more than they like to talk about themselves. That is just a fact of life. So if you can get students to reflect on how their own lived experiences relate to the course material, they will be more intrinsically motivated to learn. And I find students respond very positively to that.
And can I just add on that human component, an example of that? I used to be very resistant to this. It's like, you're gonna be a lawyer, I don't care what you think, but about yourself. But what I found was really useful, especially if you do it early in the semester or midterm, something like that. Say to people, here are 3 topics that are very much on point with what we're doing. Pick one, that way you get to, have that engagement. Pick one, tell me why it would be challenging to have a conversation about this at AU, and why it would be challenging for you based on your identity, your background, your family, your political orientation, whatever it is, to talk about it, learn it, have it in your education. And what I found was incredibly, partly you find out stuff like someone says, I'm a very liberal person with a strong personal connection to immigration, and I'm not pro-choice because I'm also personally Catholic, and it's very hard to balance those things in your class. And the next thing I do is tell me how one, like a teacher or a student, would get past that. But what I found is that the engagement on those ideas went through the roof, and it was interesting, I did it on a midterm. It was the first question, and all of the essays after it were actually better than I've seen before. So, for what it's worth, that's one idea.
So I also want to remind you, and we probably won't have time to watch this short video, but you can take a look at it on your own. It's only 3 minutes long. It's captioned. We're trying to model good practice. But it's really interesting kind of look at how assessment can reflect these 3 different dimensions. So think about what's appropriate. If I want my students to be able to think spatially, a multiple choice test might or might not get me there. So really kind of thinking about what are your learning outcomes? What are ways students can show their mastery that actually reflect what you want them to be able to do at the end of the class? It's probably not be an awesome test taker. There's probably something else. Thinking about meeting students where they are. So for example, if students are really into social media, there are ways to build assignments around these things. Also, you don't want to drop things on students that they're not prepared to do. So if you have aspirations of having your students do a really cool video presentation, but they don't have video skills, that might not be the best approach, but you could offer it as an option for those who do have those skills. I do that a lot with my own assignments. I don't care about the format as long as they meet the learning objectives. They can make a video, a PowerPoint, write a paper, give a presentation. I don't care as long as they meet the criteria, and I'll show you how I assess that right at the end. Thinking about options. Letting students choose their own topics, letting them choose their own formats for assignments tends to really promote engagement. I'm providing variety. I don't like all of my assignments to be written. I don't like all of my assignments to be based on reading. I like to try to challenge students in different ways. Part of that is because in a previous life, I did research on professionalization and preparing students for career paths, and I'm a big believer in developing their transferable skills as well as their academic and disciplinary skills. Thinking about flexibility. What are the parameters? What are the deadlines? And do those have to all be the same? Do those have to be rigid? You've heard that from some of my colleagues this morning. Thinking about your own comfort and proficiency. If you want your students to do something technical and you don't have that technical skill and you're not going to be able to answer their questions, that's okay. Take this one step at a time and do what's comfortable for you and think about incremental improvement. Be sure to clearly communicate your expectations. I'll show you that in a second. And think about authenticity and relevance. How can you give students something to do that feels like something they would encounter in the real world and applies to their own personal goals and objectives? So on that note, I just wanted to share with you, and I realize this is a bit small, you'll also have the digital copy, but this is the project rubric I actually used this summer in my class. And what you're going to notice is if you look at the bottom, one of the things they're being evaluated on is their choice of format. I don't care if they write a paper, presentation, whatever, as I already said. So part of it is the critical decision of what is the best way to represent this information and doing a good job of that. So not only are they able to build upon the skills and interests that they already have, but they're also thinking at a more advanced critical level. So I make my rubrics general enough that they can apply regardless of the type of assignment. And I would love to work with you on developing rubrics because that is my favorite thing because I am a sick individual.
And it will be yours because it makes your grading take half as much time, and it's not just because Joy's cool to hang out with, but it makes your grading, be better and more useful to your students and take half the time.
Absolutely. So if you want to talk about these things more, you have our contact information. Our friends at ASAC, Blackboard Support, and ZTRL are all available to assist you. I also wanted to share with you that we have a free self-paced Blackboard course that you can enroll in that we've been working on now for about 2 years. You can sign up and work through the activities and exercises at your own pace or just read the materials. You can use it however you want, no pressure.
It's about 2 hours total.
2 hours total if you do everything. And you can go in and just cherry pick and just focus on the things you're interested in. It's also sort of a repository of information. If that's something you're interested in, please feel free to contact me. There's cards for Blackboard Support over here on the table where you can reach me. I'd be happy to sign you up. I also want to share with you that my colleague Elisa, who works in ASAC, just sent me this link yesterday to a guide Blackboard has put together on how to integrate universal design. Not just emphasizing the technology, but also the pedagogy and philosophy behind it, but with a twist on technology. So I highly recommend checking out this brochure. It's really helpful. It's like 72 pages of great information. And I've given you a smaller URL so you don't have to learn. But I'll post all this again for you on our Blackboard site at the end of the session today. And we had a few questions to consider. We don't have tons of time for questions, so I'd really like it to be driven by your interest. But a few things you could think about is how did we implement UDL in this presentation? We tried to model some things that we think are effective practices. Think a little bit about the hesitations or concerns that you might have, and feel free to come and talk to any of us or any of your resources here at AU to help you think about strategies and solutions. And perhaps there's something we didn't discuss today that you're interested in. I personally would love to chat with any of you. I think everyone on the panel probably feels the same way. So please utilize this as resources as you move forward. I don't know how much time we have for questions. We have about 5 minutes. So yeah, anybody want to share, talk about, ask, anything?
And just quickly, I'm going to put a couple of resources on Blackboard. I'm going to give you examples of alternative assessments, and I'm going to try actually alternative, final assignments and things. And I'm going to try actually to figure out how to link some of the things I mentioned, like Blackboard quizzes regarding self-assessment and where people are at, and I'll probably bother Joy. But those will be up there as well. Any hesitation or?
I have one question about your online class.
Yeah.
So do you use this to you?
No.
Or do you do where everyone's face is on the same screen at the same time?
No. Okay, so there's a couple of ways online learning can happen. There's synchronous, right? We're all in a room talking to each other live through a video camera. I teach asynchronous. So the students are not bound to any particular day and time. I do have deadlines. So things need to be done by a certain date, but within those parameters, they work at their own pace. and they don't directly live interact with me unless we do an office hour or something.
You ever mix it up where you may have class here, but also maybe try and engage on a sort of webcam where all the students are, do any professors or teachers do that?
Yeah, there are hybrid courses here that combine face-to-face class meetings with virtual class meetings, and AUX is technically considered a hybrid class, right?
Yes.
So it's a good example of that.
Also a
Come
great
and
thing
come
to do on snow day. So
Yeah.
if it's a snow day, you can always add a discussion.
And being a little fluent in that in advance can be great. I also always have and if I do a guest talk, I always have them videoed. It's an awesome snow day alternative. But if I don't do that guest speaker the next semester, I can actually assign that video as one of my readings, or the amount of that video, before class discussion people went. And it's a way of bringing in an online learning component and as well a multimodal component.
And there is a session, I believe, later today on Blackboard Collaborate, which is the integrated video conferencing tool within Blackboard, if that's something you want to learn a little more about. And if that doesn't work for you, just come by our office and make an appointment.
That's been improved, right?
Yeah, it's getting much better. It looks much better, it's much easier to use.
Alright, so just a few years ago, I tried discussion boards on Blackboard, and it didn't seem very user-friendly, and so then Piazza was recommended to me, and I've been doing Piazza, but is it better now on Blackboard in terms of
The
discussion?
Blackboard interface has not changed since 1997 when I was a graduate student. However, there is a new version coming out that we'll be deploying next summer that supposedly is going to look and behave a little bit like some of the more modern learning management systems. If you're interested in trying to keep that within the Blackboard environment, feel free to come in and chat with me. There may be ways we can make it a little more user-friendly for you and your students. And if not, then at least I can tell you what the limitations are, and you can make an informed decision about which one's the better fit for you and your needs.
Okay, and then I also had a question about the semi-syncretic method, because I had thought about telling students that, on such and such date, be prepared to be called on or to answer questions, but then was concerned that other students would just take that as their day off and not read, so
I do it person to person, so I don't tell my whole class, Luis is on for Friday, so it's a great time to buy shoes online. I'll ping Luis and Alicia and, 2 other people if I'm having that kind of unsung hero problem. And I'll say, I'd really like it if you're talking more. It'd be great if you came to office hours, but as well, and I do this in office hours, if I have someone come, I'll say, okay, you're having this challenge. If you're having this challenge, let's pick a question. And I'm gonna call on you Friday, it's gonna be roughly around this article, roughly around this case. I don't cue that to others. When I do the 2-group thing of 4 groups, I'm not saying only one group will be on. I'm saying you folks, I'm really gonna put an emphasis for the thing that you're really, you should read everything, but you're really, really ready. Make it this component. And it takes the temperature down. But sometimes it's a very mixed bag where what I'm doing is there are people for whom the Socratic method is absolutely fine at the get-go, and there are people who need this as my meeting them partway. And then as well, there's the get them into a group there. You all are going to talk about Texas v. Johnson this way, and you all are going to do it this way. And when we come back, you guys have to have gotten each of these separate answers. And then I might very well say, you can't always put Aiden as the person who shares back. I might say, Madison, go from that group, but she's prepared because the 3 of them have done that work together. She can answer me. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, if anything, it kind of gave me a sense that there's a lot of different ways to do this. So one thing you mentioned was, having them break up into groups and say, you guys think about this question, you think about this question. That's also interesting.
And one thing that, I'm sorry.
I think another thing you can do that I've done in class is to say, we want you to orally present, but also I'm going to do this chart up on the board. And as you think of things, walk up and fill it in. So someone who may not be a speaker might be the best writer. And you just get to see, it's also using that multiple ways of engagement and action and expression is that the person who talks to me is probably not going to be the writer.
And- Yeah, and I would say, you know, group projects are fraught, because on the one hand, we really, really need them to know how to do this in business and law. I mean, it's just, even if you're like an amazing solo celloist, you know, cello player, like at some point, you know, you're gonna have to work with people. So what I do with the group thing, because I want them to do it, is I say, like, I recognize that among the four of you, somebody's a speaker, somebody's a writer, somebody's a researcher. I don't want, you know, necessarily you guys taking turns. You can assign things out among yourselves and share them based on your gifts and your spheres. And, well, then how do I deal with that? And half of your grade is based on how your group assessed you as a group member.
So we do have to clear out for the next session, so if you
Sorry
guys
about
want to ask other questions, I would encourage you to maybe contact us individually or grab us in the hall. Thanks for being here, it's much appreciated. I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your sessions today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You guys.